Hi, my name is Kathleen, and this is the YouTube video for Dr. Newman's YouTube final, or I'm not sure if it's a final, but YouTube video. Um, I'll start it like this. Have you ever noticed that sometimes we spend so much time debating the answers that we forget to ask whether we're asking the right questions? When I first looked at these three debate topics, they seemed completely unrelated. One asked about abolishing the police, another asked about universal basic income, the third asked about prison labor. But the more I thought about them, the more I realized they're really asking the same question. How do we build safer communities? They're not three separate debates. They're three different points along the same timeline. Before crime, UBI. How do we reduce the conditions that contribute to poverty, instability, and crime? During crime, how do we protect our communities while holding people like the police accountable? After crime, what do we do with people who have committed crimes and will one day return to our communities? Once I looked at the assignment this way, my answers became much clearer. From prompt one, from your perspective, what is the most compelling argument for or against the proposition that abolishing the police is beneficial to society? I do not support abolishing the police. I support reforming policing by increasing accountability, improving training, strengthening community partnerships, and making sure the right professionals respond to the right situations. At first glance, the question seems to be whether we should abolish the police. I don't think that should be the real question. The real question should be whether we're asking police to do jobs they were never trained to do. Police officers should absolutely respond to violent crimes, active shooters, domestic violence situations involving immediate danger, armed robberies, and homicide investigations, for example. For example, no one would reasonably expect mental health professionals or neighborhood volunteers to respond to a tragedy like the 2017 Las Vegas mass shooting. Situations like that require highly trained law enforcement officers who can immediately protect lives. At the same time, I don't believe every problem requires an armed police officer or SWAT. Mental health crisis, addiction-related issues, and some nonviolent situations may be better handled by trained mental health professionals, social workers, or crisis intervention teams working alongside law enforcement. I also believe accountability strengthens policing rather than weakens it. Body-worn cameras have been associated with reductions in citizen complaints in many departments and help increase transparency and public trust. Community policing allows officers to build relationships with the neighborhoods that they serve, helping prevent crime before it happens instead of only responding after it occurs. The question isn't whether police or communities should keep us safe. The safest communities are built when police officers, mental health professionals, social workers, and community organizations each perform the roles they are best trained to handle. Rather than abolishing the police, I believe we should build a system where every professional has the opportunity to do what they do best. And then I have my citations below that. And then prompt two, from your perspective, what is the most compelling argument for or against the proposition that universal basic income, or UBI, is beneficial to society? I support providing a guaranteed basic income to lower and middle income Americans, but I believe eligibility should be based on income rather than providing the same benefit to everyone, regardless of financial need. At first glance, the question seems to be whether people deserve free money. I don't think that should be the question. The real question is how we prevent one unexpected financial crisis from turning into a homelessness or a domino effect of other crises. Research has shown that many families are only one emergency away from financial disaster. A serious illness, an unexpected medical bill, or a car breaking down can quickly create a chain reaction. A parent may miss work because they no longer have transportation. Then they fall behind on rent. They receive an eviction notice. then they eventually become homeless. Too often, people don't become homeless because of one bad decision. They become homeless because of one unexpected crisis, which triggers another until they can no longer recover. One example that shaped my thinking was the temporary expansion of the federal child tax credit during COVID-19. Well, it wasn't a true universal basic income program. It did provide many families with monthly payments for a limited time, although I think it should be permanent. Research found that those payments helped reduce child poverty while they were in effect and allowed many families to cover necessities like food, rent, childcare, and transportation. To me, that demonstrates an important principle. When families receive timely financial support before a crisis spirals out of control, many are better able to remain stable and avoid much larger problems. That doesn't mean every person should receive the same payment regardless of income. I believe assistance should be targeted towards people who genuinely need it most. I also believe recipients should have the freedom to decide how to spend the money because families usually know whether they need groceries, rent, childcare, medication, or a car repair better than the government does. Helping people stay on their feet before they lose everything is often less expensive and more humane than waiting until they need emergency shelter, welfare programs, government assistance, or other crisis services after they've already fallen into homelessness and spiraled. To me, universal basic income isn't really about giving people free money. It's about preventing small financial emergencies from becoming life-changing crises. Investing in people before they fall is one of the smartest ways to build stronger families, healthier communities, and ultimately safer communities. And then I have my citations below that. Prompt 3, from your perspective, should prisoners be required to work without pay as a way to repay their debt to society? Or should prisons focus on rehabilitation, education, and preparing incarcerated individuals to successfully return to society? And I will say as a side note, I was married to law enforcement for about 10 years. So, although many people think that my input on this or my view on this might be one way. Usually they're surprised to find that my thoughts on this are not what many law enforcement think. Um, I do not support requiring prisoners to work without pay or with very little pay. I believe incarceration is the punishment, but rehabilitation should be the purpose of that. At first glance, the question seems to be whether prisoners should work without pay to repay their debt to society. I don't think that is the real question. The real question should be what kind of people do we want returning to our communities? People should absolutely be held accountable for the crimes they commit. Victims deserve justice, and incarceration is an appropriate punishment for many serious offenses. However, the overwhelming majority of incarcerated individuals will eventually return to society. When that day comes, I believe every one of us has a stake in whether they return with the skills and support necessary to become productive members of their communities, or whether they return with the same problems that led them to prison in the first place. If incarceration is the punishment, rehabilitation should be the purpose of it. That doesn't mean prison should be easy. It means prison should be meaningful. Instead of focusing primarily on unpaid labor, I believe correctional facilities should emphasize education, vocational training, apprenticeships, substance abuse treatment, mental health services, financial literacy, parenting classes, and job preparation. These programs are not rewards for criminal behavior. We know as students, these are not easy tasks to perform. But they are investments in public safety because they reduce the likelihood that someone will commit another crime after they are released. Research supports approach. A major Rand Corporation study found that incarcerated individuals who participated in correctional education had significantly lower odds of returning to prison and were more likely to find employment after release. The researchers also concluded that every dollar invested in correctional education saves several dollars in future incarceration costs. To me, that's not simply compassion, it's smart public policy. The safest communities are not created by producing better criminals. They're created by producing better neighbors. I also think we're asking one more important question too late. If education, job training, and meaningful employment helps reduce crime after prison, why are we waiting until someone has already committed a crime before investing in them? Why aren't we creating more apprenticeships, trade programs, educational opportunities, and pathways to good paying jobs before people become involved in the criminal justice system? Preventing crime will always be better than responding to it after somebody has already become a victim. But people should absolutely be held accountable for what they've done. But if we're going to release them one day anyway, then we have a responsibility to give them every opportunity not to create another victim. Punishment without rehabilitation creates more victims. To me, this debate isn't really about prison labor, it's about hope. Not hope that ignores accountability, hope that believes people can change when we provide the tools, education, treatment, and opportunities to help them succeed. Because in the end, if incarceration is the punishment, rehabilitation should be the purpose. And then I have my citations below that.